me. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to school. I may, just so you're not concerned, I do use a cane sometimes, and sometimes I don't need it. So if I put it down and start walking, it's not a miracle. I'm not cured. It just sometimes I don't need it. Cool. All right. So how many of you are wondering why I get angry when I eat bananas? Do you want to know? Should I just tell you? Okay. So I have a banana allergy, which is weird. Okay, we'll just get that out of the way. But I asked my doctor, I was like, why is it when I eat bananas I feel like punching something? And the doctor was like, well, sometimes when people have an allergy, raise your hand if you have an allergy in here. Okay, so sometimes when you have an allergy, you have like hives, or you get like an itchy throat, and that's your body's way of fighting the allergy. And usually when we're in danger evolutionarily, right, we either have a fight or a flight response, and apparently my fight response is really strong when I eat bananas. So there's your answer. All right, so today we're going to be talking about power and privilege. And I know that this word privilege tends to be a little icky, right? How many of you feel a little icky when you hear the word privilege? You're like, it's okay to be honest. Thank you for being honest over there, Green. Well done. Yes? We got you. And so when we're talking about power and privilege in society, a lot of times we think about just one or two things. And we look at the room around us and we're like, there's not that much diversity in this room. But I'm going to tell you there is a lot of diversity in this room, whether you realize it or not. And we're going to go through the different parts of your identity to figure out which parts of your identity have power and privilege in today's society, and which parts of your identity don't. And then after this presentation, you're going to go to your advisements, and you're going to work with your advisement teacher and as a group to figure out how to be an ally to people who don't have the power and privilege in these various identities. Does that sound good?
Sure.
How many of you would like to be an ally? How many of you don't know what ally means? Okay. So an ally, an ally is a person who advocates for others. Basically, being an ally is like being a good friend. How many of you think you're a good friend? All right, those of you who don't have your hand up, here's your chance to learn how, okay? Because here's the deal. Throughout your life, you are going to be working with people who look very different from you, who come from very different backgrounds than you, who have different life experiences than you. You're going to be their co-workers. You might marry one of them, who knows? Okay, so a little bit about me. My husband is what I call a white man. He's very white, okay? My students, when I taught at Omaha South High, were like, he's glow in the dark whiteness. So they'll tell them. Okay, so I'm married to a white man. And he's an American, and he went to Ralston High School. Do you know anyone at Ralston High School? Okay. Went to Ralston High School, and he told me when we first met, we met when he was 18 and I was 19. We were a bunch of children, like you all. And he was like, my high school was diverse. We had Shauna and Marcus. I was like, dude, if you can name them all on one hand, like that's not a diverse high school. He knows better now. And he was like mind blown because I grew up in Kenya. Can anyone tell me where Kenya is on a map?
Africa.
Africa, well done, yes. My husband, when I met him, he was like, is that right near India? I was like, yeah, who's your geography teacher? So yes, it's in Africa. I grew up in East Africa in Kenya, which is on the coast of East Africa. And some of you are like, but you're not dark enough to be from Africa. There are people of many different colors in Africa, just so you know. And I'm of mixed race, so I'm part black, part Indian from India. And I'm Muslim. And I'm still a practicing Muslim, and I married this white man who's an atheist, and our children are very mixed up, as you can tell. So, so we have a very mixed family, and so some of you might find yourselves in the same position as my white man. You might find somebody who becomes your best friend, or who becomes your spouse, who comes from a completely different part of the world, or you might find a coworker who comes from a completely different background than you. And so the whole point of this presentation today and your work with advisement is, how do you become a good coworker? How do you become a good friend, a good ally, or even just a good community member, a fellow citizen of somebody who's different from you? Because the great thing about America is that we have what we call diversity, right? There are people from many different backgrounds here. So does that sound like something you're interested in? Hopefully. Okay, if not, I'll win you over by the end, I promise. Okay. So we're going to talk about different identities, and we're going to talk about, and I'm going to have you answer to me where you think the power and the privilege lies. Now, when I'm talking about power and privilege, I'm talking about advantages that are given to you by society, and you didn't ask for them. Okay? Like, it's just something that you get by virtue of being born who you are. So the important thing to know about power and privilege is if you have it, I don't want you to feel guilty about having it, because you didn't ask for it. It's an unearned advantage. It's an unearned advantage that you didn't ask for, so I don't want you to feel guilty about it, because when you feel guilty or you feel shame that you have privilege, it doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help you be a good friend, right? If you have something your friend doesn't have, you could sit there and feel guilty about it and be like, oh, my poor friend. I feel so bad that I have this thing, and your friend's like gonna say, get over it, you know? So the first thing I'd like to talk about is ageism. And this is something that you students, not you teachers, but you students do not have the power and the privilege when it comes to age. And when we're talking about power and privilege, we're talking about today, 2020, can't believe it's 2020, in Midwestern America, because these things will change depending on where in the world you are and what time period it is. Does that make sense? Right?
Yes.
Okay, if it doesn't, it will. So, ageism in America, there is a range of ages where after a certain age you start to get power and privilege from society. Okay, so when you're younger, you don't. There hits a certain age where you start to have everything you need to be successful in society, and then you get older and there's another age you hit where you start to lose those powers and those privileges. Okay, and I'll tell you now that in high school you don't have any of those powers and privileges. Okay? So who can tell me what the age you think it is where you start to get power and privilege? What age can't you wait to be so that you get those powers from society? Yes? Okay, we have a bid for 18. Tell me why 18. Yes. Perfect. Yes, so at 19 you get to sign documents and contracts and things like that. Okay, do we have a bid for higher than 18? Yes, over there. 25 or 30, tell me what?
100.
Yes, we got some biology, you're right. At 25, your prefrontal cortex starts to be actually less brain damaged. So until you're 25, you basically have marshmallow fluff up there. Did you know this? It's weird. Like your synapses haven't fully formed, and that's why society says, well, these young people, they can't make good decisions, because what happens in your frontal cortex is you're able to make good decisions, you're able to control your impulses, okay? So how many of you have done something where you were like, I don't know why I did that. I just made a bad decision, and I don't know why I did it. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because marshmallow fluff, okay? That's why you did it. And after you're 25, all of that is figured out, and it's now actual brain matter, okay? And so then you start to be able to make good decisions. So I'm actually going to go with, what is your name, sir? John. I'm going to go with John's bid there. 25 is actually when society starts to think, okay, we can trust you. Because what happens at 25 is your insurance goes down, okay? Because insurance companies are like, you're going to make better decisions, so we don't have to charge you as much for insurance. You're able to lease an apartment or rent a car by yourself without having a co-signer. You're more likely to have job experience at that point. How many of you have applied for a job and they're like, you don't have enough experience, so we're not going to give you the job. And you're like, how am I supposed to get experience if you won't hire me? Right? Okay, so that's an example of ageism, is when you're not hired because you don't have enough experience. So 25 is when society says, yes, we can trust you, you're going to make good decisions, you're not going to do stupid things. All right? So, and by that time you can vote, you can own a gun, you can run for office, you can sign up to be in the army, you can gamble, you can smoke, you can do all these different things, right? By 25.
That's 18.
All right. The other thing is, the people who have the power in any situation, whether it's at your job or in government, whoever gets to make the decisions are the people who have the power. So if you think about who gets to run government, the people who run for office, they're usually over 25. There are a few little exceptions. I heard of a mayor who's 18. He's doing a great job. But for the most part, most of them are between the ages of 25. And then what do you think the upper limit is where you start to lose power and privilege?
60.
65. Did I hear 65? All right, I would agree. It's about 65. So about that time, people start to retire, right? And then you're living on a fixed income. So now you don't have as much earning potential. So that's another form of power, is your earning potential. How much money can you make, right? So my mother-in-law, the Whiteman's mother, she's also a white lady, shocker. She is a nurse and a social worker. So she has a master's in nursing, she has a master's in social work. And she is 67, and she's really good at her job. The woman could arm wrestle a bear, like she's real strong. She's a hospice nurse, so she has to lift people, you know, to clean them and to take care of them. And she's finding it really hard to get a job because they're saying things like, well, you're not gonna be strong enough to handle our patients because you're old. And they say things like, everything's paperless now and you won't be able to learn our technology. The woman can tweet better than anybody I know. Okay, she's very good at technology, but they assume because of her age that she's not gonna be good at technology, that she can't, you know, take care of patients because they don't think she has the physical strength, even though that's not true. So that's an example of ageism at the other end of the spectrum. Does that make sense? Yes? All right, I'll give you another example of ageism. Have any of you seen signs on like convenience stores or dollar stores about who can go in groups of more than two, or who can't go in groups of more than two? You haven't seen this? What have you seen?
That if they're like under 18, you can't go in groups of more than 3.
Yeah. If you're under 18, you can't go into a dollar store or convenience store in groups of more than 3. Why? What do they think you're gonna do? You're gonna steal. Because you know, teenagers steal, right? But here's the thing, so I'm a big fan of what we call facts. So I look at data, I'm a professor, right? So I look at data and statistics. And I looked at, is it true that teenagers are the demographic that steal the most from dollar stores and convenience stores? Do you know it's not true? Do you want to know who does? It's going to shock you. It's middle-aged white ladies with their big canvas toes, y'all. That's who does the stealing. It's weird, right? But you'll never see somebody tell your mom, like, you can't come in with your friends because you're gonna steal, lady. All the Snickers are in danger, right? So that's another example of ageism, where we discriminate against a group of people like teenagers because we assume they're gonna do something, or we assume that they're bad because of who they are, right? So did the middle-aged ladies, did they earn that privilege? No. Society just gave it to them. They're like, you look trustworthy. You can come in and be around the Snickers. We're not worried about it, right? But teenagers come in and they're like, watch out for the Snickers. I don't know why I keep bringing up Snickers. Snickers are disgusting. They have nuts in them. I don't like it. I'm not going to yuck your yum, though. If you like Snickers, that's cool. All right. So we're going to move on from ageism to the next ism. Are you ready for this? Is this exciting? Is this fun yet? We don't know. All right. So the next ism is what we call faithism. Faithism. So in ageism, we figured out that there's a group that has power and privilege and a group that doesn't. So the group that has power and privilege, we decided between the ages of 25 and 65, and the people who don't have the power and privilege are below 25 and above 65, all right? So, are you on board with me? All right. So, in faithism, in Midwestern America in 2020, there is a group that has power and privilege to do with their faith, and there's a group that does not, okay? So who wants to tell me which group does have power and privilege? What's that society's like, you're cool, you're normal, this is exactly who you are? Yes? Okay, so she says, did you say Christians? Does anybody else agree? All right, a few people are like, Okay, so then who doesn't have the power and privilege? Jews. Jewish people? Who else? Muslims? Who else?
Atheists.
Yes? Pagans? Who else? Say that again? Mormons are actually part of the Christian group, but I would agree with you to some extent. I would agree with you to some extent. All right, so here's the secret. Everybody else, anybody who is not a Christian doesn't have the power and the privilege, but let's get some proof, because is that really true, right? So, what are the power and privileges that are afforded to people who are Christian in Midwestern America in 2020? Give me some examples. Yes? it is much easier for them to get married because, first of all, if you want to find a house of worship that matches yours, so if you want to find a church as a Christian, it's pretty easy to find one. I think I drove by 4 or 5 of them on the way here from Ralston. So it's easy to find a church to get married in. It's easy to find an ordained person to marry you, right? Does that sound about right? How many of you plan to get married in the future? Okay, so you got to think about these things. What else? What other privileges? Can you go to the courthouse to get married? You can't. Yes. So it's the difference between a civil ceremony and a religious ceremony, right? So if you want to have a civil ceremony, you can do that. That's cool. But if you wanted to have a religious ceremony, you wouldn't be able to find a place or a minister or somebody to marry. So excellent distinction there, sir. What other privileges are granted to people who are Christian? Yes?
They get to go to the one true afterlife.
They get to go to the one true afterlife. Are you saying I'm damned to hell because I'm Muslim? Oh, ouch. Wait, maybe most of my friends are there. We don't know. I think he was being sarcastic, right? Yeah, he was being sarcastic. I like your humor. All right. Let's come back to it, y'all. Let's come back to it. So, what else? Yes. Christmas break. Yes, tell me more. Tell me about Christmas break.
We got, 2 weeks off for Christmas break surrounding December 25th. Holidays are not on December 25th.
Yeah. So that's a definite advantage. So if you are a Christian, you never have to go to school on Christmas Day. Whether it's on a Sunday or on a Wednesday, whatever day Christmas Day happens to fall on, this country believes that if it's Christmas Day, you should not have to go to school, right? So everybody gets a Christmas break. And if you think about actually the way the school holidays are created, the way the school calendar is created, it's around Christian holidays, right? So you're going to have a spring break around Easter time. You're never going to have school on Christmas Day. But if you are from a faith that is not Christian, if you have a high holiday, so for example, Jewish high holidays like Rosh Hashanah, or if you have Muslim holidays like Eid, or you have Hindu holidays like Diwali, all of those, you have to go to school on that day. And if you don't, you have to make up stuff that you missed, whether it's a test or you'll miss a field trip if it's something like that, and you have to make up that day. And if you are a professional, right, you have to take a personal day or a vacation day to celebrate your religion, whereas Christians don't have to do that. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's a very real privilege. What other privileges do Christians have? Yes. Somewhere over here. Yes. An abundance of places to worship. Absolutely. That's a good one. What else? What else do we have? Yes.
I am Christian, so we believe in one God. I know other religions believe in different
Yes.
gods. Like I know in Buddhism they believe in
The Buddha.
in Hinduism and Christians believe in
Yes.
spiritualism.
You're right.
So if one is a Christian, it would be like there's one God. There's one holy text. There will be the Bible.
Yeah.
Then on the Quran,
Right.
other texts.
Yeah, so when you're talking about Christianity, everybody pretty much knows what you're talking about, right? So there are lots of public references. That's an excellent point. There are lots of public references to the Bible, and folks are going to know what you're talking about. But if you refer to a holy text that's not the Bible, most people won't know what you're talking about, right? And actually, so I was an English teacher for 10 years at Omaha South High School. Do you all take British Lit here? What was that record? No, we do not. So I had to teach British Lit for 10 years, and you can't teach British literature without teaching the Bible, because British literature like Beowulf and Chaucer and Shakespeare and all of that was told by word of mouth, right? It was storytelling. And so the first people to write those things down, and the only people who knew how to read and write, were priests, right? Were holy men, Christian holy men. And so they infused a lot of Christian references into those stories to try to convert more people to Christianity, right? And so if you have to take British literature, and some of you might in college, you're basically learning the Bible. So that's another example. That's something religion is taught in public schools that teach, Christianity is taught in public schools that teach Brit Lit, just because that's the way it is. Any of you musicians in the room? Any musicians? Okay, so a lot of your music is Christian music that you learn in school too, right? So yeah, if I want to buy a Christmas card, I can easily find one. If I want to buy stuff for Easter, I can easily find one. But if I'm of any other faith and I need to get those things for my faith celebrations, can't find them. Now here's the other interesting thing. Remember I talked about running for office, right? Politics? So you have to swear an oath on a Bible when you run for office, or if you're testifying in court. However, if you are not Christian, you get to not do that. And so this last time when people were being sworn into Congress, there were 3 people who did not swear on a Bible. 2 of them were Muslim congresswomen, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, and they swore on Thomas Jefferson's Quran. So Thomas Jefferson owned a Quran, and they swore on Thomas Jefferson's Quran. And then I think it was Kristen Gillibrand, who's an atheist, she swore on a copy of the U.S. Constitution. But a lot of people didn't know that you could do that, and there was this huge uproar when they did that. There's also, have you heard of Gallup polls? Have you been called for a Gallup poll? So Gallup does all this research, usually around election times, to find out who are you most likely to vote for. And every time there is an election, they will ask people throughout America, and then they'll publish the results. And like I said, I like numbers. And so I looked at the Gallup poll results, and they said during a presidential election, who would you be most likely to vote for when it comes to religion, and who would you be least likely to vote for if everything else is equal? All right, you following me so far? And so what American people said, the general public, is we're most likely to vote for a Christian. We would trust a Christian the most. And then at the very bottom, they had atheists and they had Muslims. And so everything else being equal, people don't trust you if you are not Christian. Okay? So you are less likely to get the vote. The other thing that I noticed during elections is that the Omaha World Herald, does anybody read the World Herald? Okay, so they publish, every time there's an election, even if it's a small one, they will ask everybody who's running for office, what is your religion? And they publish it in the World Herald. And so I saw this and I thought, that's weird, because in any other job interview, it's illegal to ask you for your religion. But the World Herald does this for people running for office, the media in general does this, and they published everybody, people who are running for county clerk, to school board, to Senate, everything else. And I looked at the World Herald, and it was all of these people running for office in Nebraska, and everyone was like Christian, Catholic, Christian, Catholic, Christian, Catholic. And there was one person who didn't answer Christian and Catholic, and it was Senator Ernie Chambers, and he wrote algebra. And it was hilarious, but the reason he said that was, this is a ridiculous question. You should not be asking people in a job interview situation what their religion is. So if you ask me a ridiculous question, I'm going to give you a ridiculous answer. Does that make sense? And so that's another example of religious discrimination, is people are less likely to vote for you if they find out that you're not Christian. Now, like I said, it depends on the time period, because when Kennedy was running for president, people at that time did not trust him because of his religion, because Kennedy was Catholic. And so that has changed with the times. Nowadays, we do trust Catholics, but back at that time, we didn't. And they said the reason we don't trust Catholics is because then the Pope will run the country. Okay? So these things can change with time. I have a personal example about faithism. I went to Mullen, Nebraska. Has anybody heard of Mullen? It's a little village, 480 people, in August of this year. And I was going to do a talk about secret kindness agents, so I was going to talk about kindness. And my picture was put out in the community, and some people Googled me because they saw I had a brown face, and they were like, who is this stranger? And they found out that I'm a Muslim. And then some Facebook posts went around the night before I spoke, and there were death threats, and people were going to come to the school and protest me being there because I'm a Muslim. They didn't trust me to talk to their children. They used words like devil, Satan, wolf in sheep's clothing, deceit wrapped in kindness. We should go be Chris Kyle, who was the American sniper who bragged about how many Muslims he killed. And so just because of my faith, they didn't trust me to speak to children. So y'all are doing it, just so you know. Right? So that's an example of faithism. Is everybody clear on faithism now? All right, power and privilege, Christians and Catholics at this point, who knows if that'll change. And then everybody else doesn't have the power and privilege. Okay. Next one, which goes with, this is my cane, her name is Lucy P. Like the cat in Cinderella. Ableism. All right, so in Midwestern America, who has the power and privilege when it comes to ability and disability? Who has the power and privilege? Neurotypical people, yes, as opposed to neurodivergent people. What else? Yes? People without disabilities, excellent. So the people who have power and privilege are the people who are able-bodied, able-minded, neurotypical people who don't are people who have any type of disability. So, who can give me some examples of ableism? How are people with disabilities discriminated against by society? Yes. Yes, so no ramps or elevators, especially in what we designate as historical buildings, because they get to have this, what they call grandfathered in clause, where they don't have to put elevators in, they don't have to do those kinds of accommodations for folks who have physical disabilities. I see somebody who has crutches over here. Yes, you get it. You know how it is, right? And the thing about disabilities is even if you don't have disabilities right now, you're gonna have them if you have the privilege of living long enough, right? Or if something happens to you, if you're in an accident. How many of you play football? Any football players in the room? Right? Lots of injuries can happen in football or any other sport, really. And so you could have a disability tonight, you could have a disability tomorrow. So able-bodied people are definitely, those are really easy to figure out. Access to buildings. My friend Nikki is in a wheelchair, and she was asked to host a campaign party for a political candidate. And she said yes, and she was very excited, and she, as a part of the hosting duties, I guess, she had to invite a whole bunch of people. But the candidate who was running for office got to choose where this event was going to happen, and he decided to have it in a building in the Old Market. And so Nikki and I got to the building, and we realized that she couldn't even get into the building where she was hosting this campaign party, right? And so that's an example of ableism. Also rooms, hotel rooms that are accessible for folks in wheelchairs are more expensive than rooms that are not. And then healthcare, of course, is a lot more expensive. I've heard of a lot of young people dying recently because they can't afford insulin. And so they're rationing their insulin because then they can get food to eat. And you can't do that. Anybody diabetic in the room or know somebody who's diabetic? Right? So that's a very real fear. And it's a lot like that with lots of other medications as well. Right? With neurotypicality, we have a lot of events and even schooling that is built around people who are neurotypical and that do not accommodate people who are neurodivergent, right? And so even inclusion, if you get to be in a regular class, if you have an IEP or not. I'll give you an example. I had a couple students who had cerebral palsy. Nothing wrong with their brain, it's just their bodies didn't work very well, and they were both, these two women were in motorized wheelchairs. And I taught a co-taught special ed class that was for people who had disabilities, but it was supposed to be for people who had learning disabilities. These two young ladies were put in that class simply because they had an IEP. They should have been in honors English, but they were put in my special ed class because they were in wheelchairs. Uncool, right? Uncool. All right, any other examples of ableism before we move on? Yes?
If you have a mental disorder, people automatically assume that you are stupid.
Yes. So they think that you aren't intelligent at all, even though there are different intelligences. The other example of that with mental illness is when you see mass shootings, people say, oh, they must be mentally ill. When actually, and again, if we look at the facts, mentally ill folks are more likely to be the target of violence as opposed to being the perpetrators of violence. Okay? Yes?
They don't let us play games.
They don't let you play games at school. Like what kind of games? What does that have to do with disability, sir? I'll wait. You withdraw your comment. Okay, thank you. Any other examples of ableism? Yes.
Sorry about not being able to play games like Fortnite. Oh, I withdraw my comment.
They underestimate you. That's exactly right. Yes, a lot of people will underestimate you if you have a disability. I have students who have speech issues, for example, and people talk to them like they're dumb, and these are folks who are geniuses, right? So just because it's an obvious disability, they think they underestimate you. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's an excellent example. You're treated as fragile. One of my students who was in that motorized wheelchair, she's actually a wheelchair basketball player with the Red Dogs at UNO. And her teacher wouldn't let her do conditioning and training with the other kids in PE at school, even though she is a world-class athlete, right? Because they thought she was fragile. So absolutely, excellent examples. All right, so let's move on from ableism. The next one is sexism. This is discrimination based on gender. All right, so for some reason, this is getting a reaction. What are some examples of sexism? Well, first of all, who has the power and privilege in today's society when it comes to sexism? Men, and who doesn't? The women code. All right, so what are some?
Yeah, attack helicopters.
What are some examples of sexism that we see in society?
No.
Yes. Okay, I need to be able to hear him, so if we could simmer down a little bit. Thank you. Yes, sir.
What do you say?
Do you know why? Do you know why men are expected to pay for the first date? You're right. It is because of sexism, and it is because men make more money than women do.
Getting controversial. Let's stop.
Not only that, it gets worse, y'all. It gets worse. So men not only make more than women do, but women are also paying what we call the pink tax.
That's not a thing.
I heard somebody say it's not a thing, but since I'm a fan of facts, I'm going to tell you what the facts are.
JFK passed on.
So here are the facts. My white man, as you know, I'm married to a white man. He buys a razor for shaving purposes, and I buy a razor for shaving purposes. These razors are exactly the same. I know because I've used both of them and they work in exactly the same way. But because my razor is in the lady colors of pink and purple, it is twice the price. So that is the pink tax. Women pay more for our products that are exactly the same, and we make less money. So not only do we make less money, but it's more expensive to be a woman than it is to be a man. All right, we have some hands up over here. Yes.
After that it's more expensive, personal hygiene products, in addition to makeup and dress.
Yes, personal hygiene products in addition to dress code.
Like makeup and
So let me expand on that. Thank you. That's an excellent point. If we could simmer down again, thank you. So, if you are getting ready for a job interview, how many of you plan to get a job in the future?
Don't wear makeup though.
All right. So if you're getting ready for a job interview, and I know this because I live in this world, and like I said, I'm married to a man, we were both getting ready for a job interview one day, okay? He got up, he showered using his very cheap stuff, right? He washed his hair, he didn't use any products, he did not have to put on any makeup, he did not have to use a bra, or nylons, or anything like that. He put on a pair of pants, he put on a nice button-down shirt, he put on his shoes, and he was out the door in 5 minutes. I had to wash and style my hair, because women, our hair cannot be messy, right? It can't be frizzy, it's gotta be smooth. I had to wear makeup because you've got to wear just enough makeup that maybe she's born with it, maybe it's Maybelline, right? You can't wear too much because then, you know, you get called names, but you can't wear none of it because then you look like you're 12, okay? So I had to spend money on makeup. I had to spend money on much nicer clothes and a variety of clothes because men get to wear kind of the same thing every day, and we have to wear a variety. And so all of that costs a lot of money. So it actually cost me more money to get ready for a job interview than it did, right? Okay, in the plaid shirt. Do they?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so his question was, why is it men work more labor-intensive jobs and more hours on average, while the women take care of the children and the house and the shopping and making the appointments and buying the birthday presents and managing the budget at home and doing all the emotional labor to support that men doing those jobs? So actually, the research shows that women actually work harder than men do.
Women work harder than men do.
Yes, in the back. Yeah, talk about job interviews? Yes, thank you.
My wife was brought in for an interview for an athletic director
Yes.
position. She was an educator.
Okay.
At a Class A, I won't say any name, a Class A high school in the Metro Conference.
Yes.
And she was really concerned about a question she got asked in the interview, which was, how would you handle a football coach who's been assigned and worked here for over 20 years, and you had a personality conflict as a woman, and I guarantee you that there was no male that would have ever been asked a question like that.
Absolutely.
That's an illegal question.
That is an illegal question. That's an excellent example. That women are also asked in job interviews, which are not allowed to be asked, do you plan to have children? And if you plan to have children, you won't be hired because then you're going to be a liability, right? I just watched a movie about pilots who were discriminated against in the same exact way. Yes. Gender segregated restrooms, especially for non-binary people and also for trans folks, right? Yes. So people are afraid that trans people are going to attack people in the bathroom. Well, here's another fact. People have been going to the bathroom with trans people for thousands of years and nothing has ever happened to them. The trans people are more likely to be victims of violence in bathrooms than anybody else. So that's a great example. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, people think you're more qualified for the job if you are a certain gender. If you look at Congress and the Senate and the House, most of our most of our representatives in every party are men. I just saw a photo yesterday of a reproductive health bill that was signed into law, and everybody who signed that bill was a man. So men get to legislate what women do with our uteruses, and that's an example of sexism, right? Also, my brother-in-law is in the National Guard, and he told me he was reading his insurance statement. He's also a white man, by the way. He's the National Guard. And he said that in the National Guard, birth control is not covered for women, but Viagra is. So I wonder who made that law. Yes.
I'd like to point out that women actually make up the majority of the population, and women vote, so they elected them.
That's true. Court cases, they usually don't believe the girl, actually, because they question her character, especially when it comes to rape allegations. Most rapes go unreported because when we do report them, they do not test the rape kits, and they make us go through the trial as though we're the person who did something wrong. All right, we're running out of time, so I want to quickly go through the next ones. There are 3 more. So we have sexism. The next one is heterosexism. And this is where folks who are straight have the power and the privilege. For example, and this goes for sexism as well, there is something called the gay panic defense. And there is something called the trans panic defense. And what that means is, if you are, for example, on a date with somebody, and they tell you they're trans, you can murder them.
Oh, really?
And you can get away with it claiming the trans panic defense. This is legal in all 50 states.
Explain what it is. Explain it for
If, also, you are at a bar and somebody hits on you and they are the same gender as you, you can murder them. And you can get away with it claiming the
What
gay
bill is
panic
this?
defense.
I'd like to know. Where? What?
So that's an example of sexism and heterosexism. Also, gay people in the state of Nebraska, except for the city of Omaha, can be fired with no repercussions because somebody thought they were gay. It didn't even have to be, except for the city of Omaha. People can refuse to rent to you because they think you're gay or trans. All right, so these are very real repercussions. Foster care, adoption, people are discriminated against because of their gender identity and because of their sexual orientation. All right, so that's heterosexism. Also, when you think about what your curriculum includes in many places, all of these things are not included. The next one is classism, where we know the rich folks have the biggest tax cuts. They're also the people who can run for office, and so they get to make these big decisions because it takes money to run a campaign, right? And then we have appearanceism, which is where the pretty ones get all the benefits. I don't even have to go into that. You all know it, right? And then the last one is racism. And so those of us who are people of color, even if you look in this room, you do not have any teachers of color. There is a reason for that, and it's called racism.
Really?
If you think about, just being real, y'all, keeping it 100. Keeping it 100. If you think about who our representatives are in government, we still have a long way to go when it comes to equal representation in government. I am one of the few professors of color in my department. I was one of 2 teachers of color at Ralston High School, and when a student bumped into me in the classroom, he looked down at me and said, "Damn minorities," as a teacher. And there are things that I do where I do speeches like this where people laugh at what I say. And they would not laugh at a white man saying the same thing. I see a lot of nodding. So that's also an example of racism. I'm sure that you can use Professor Google and find lots more examples of these things. But what I want to say to you again is if you have the examples of power and privilege, if you are within that group, what I want you to think about is how do you use your power and privilege to be an advocate and an ally for the people who don't have those powers and privileges. And I know I'm going over my time, but we just got to finish with this real quick. So for example, if you are able-bodied and you have a friend who's in a wheelchair, I don't want you to be stuck in that pity of, oh my gosh, they can't use their legs and I can, and to feel shame about it. Or if you're a white person and you have a friend who's a person of color, I don't want you to feel shame about the fact that you're white. That's not going to help your friend who's a person of color, right? And they don't want to be pitied. We don't want to be pitied. What we want is for you to be a good ally. So if your friend in a wheelchair wants to go out to dinner, you take your able-bodied self to that restaurant and you find out if they can get in that building. And you find out if the restaurant's on the same floor as the dining hall. And you find out if they can actually get through the restaurant to the table and if the bathroom is accessible. You use your power and your privilege to help them. And the most important way to do that is to ask them, how can I support you? And when they tell you about oppression that they experience, you have to believe them. Because you don't know their lived experience. You haven't lived their life. They know the type of oppression and discrimination that they go through. You don't. So you have to listen, and you have to believe them, and you have to be kind. Kind.